Okay, thank you everybody for coming. And today it's my great honor to introduce our distinguished speaker, Dr. Alon HALEVY. He is in the field of database systems, and I'm actually in the field of human-computer interaction. What made me the host? It's because I'm very intrigued by Alon's work in human values and responsible management of personal data. The work he's doing currently in the Meta Reality Labs, and prior to joining Meta, he was the CEO of the Megagon Labs, and also, prior to that, he led structured database group at Google, and prior to that, as a professor in the University of Washington. So Alon is very well known for his work in the database area. He has written a very well-known book on data integration. And also, he's equally well known for his knowledge in coffee. He has another very famous book called, I think, The Infinite Emotions of Coffee. So perhaps he will have more coffee story together with his talk. Okay, so without further ado, let's invite Alon to the stage.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation, and it's wonderful to be here in Hong Kong, especially after the pandemic. The world is opening up, so I'm really, really happy to be here. I'm going to talk about personal digital data today, and I'll explain to you why I think it's a really important topic. And this is joint work with people at Meta Reality Labs. So Reality Labs, by the way, is the part of Meta that does all the AR, VR, and metaverse. And Reality Labs research is the research part of that, and we're looking very, very far in the future into technologies that will be part of your experiences with these devices. In our case, it's more the smart glasses. So these glasses are really dumb. In 15 years from now, people will look at these glasses like, what? They wore these glasses? They didn't have a camera? They didn't have anything? So enjoy it while it's there. Some of you know for sure Wang Chutan, right, from the database community. Richard Newcomb is my boss. Okay, so let me try to convince you that working on personal data is important. Okay, so the matter of fact is we create data all the time. Everything we do, we're creating data. We're taking photos. I went for a run this morning. My watch knows that I went for a run. I try to navigate somewhere. Google knows that I navigated there. I buy something on Amazon. I listen to something on Spotify. I read a book on Kindle. So much of what we're doing is being recorded digitally. We have these digital breadcrumbs everywhere. Now, there's been a lot of attention, especially, I'm going to look at you, Christian, especially in Europe, right, about what is being done with personal data. And the main question people are asking is, what are the corporations that support all these free services, right? There's nothing free in the world. If you don't pay for it, the saying is, if you're not paying for it, then you are the product, right? So there's been a lot of attention about what are corporations doing with all this data. And that's a really, really important question. But the question we're going to be talking about today is, what are we doing with our personal data? Okay? So not to diminish the importance of the other question, but I think it's well, I just contradicted myself. It's equally important to also ask are we enjoying the benefits of our own data? Okay? So that's one motivation. The second motivation is, well, have you heard of ChatGPT? I hear it's a big thing, okay? So ChatGPT and all these chat systems based on language models, they have amazing knowledge. They can give you answers about anything you ask, right? Whether the answers are true or not is a different issue. But one thing they don't know is they don't know about you, okay? And in order to be really, really useful when you chat with a system, if you want to build an assistant that is really helpful to you, they need to know about you. And so how do you convey to a system information about you that enables them to give you advice or to give you answers to questions that is really relevant to what you need? Okay, because each one of us is different, and the chat systems need to know that. So that's the second motivation. Third motivation comes from what Shajan mentioned in the beginning about human value alignment. Okay, so human value alignment is basically, well, there should be systems in there, is how do we make sure that the AIs that we build somehow conform or embody the values that we think are important for human flourishing. Okay, so I'm going to say a little bit more about the alignment problem. So think of values like freedom and civic engagement and connection and knowledge and things like that philosophers and experts in ethics have been talking about for thousands of years. Okay, so how do we make sure that AI systems embody these values? That's kind of the wrong way of asking, right? Because what are these values, and how do we make sure that we know what the systems are doing, right? We actually don't want to make, we shouldn't be the ones who determine what these values are, especially not the companies making these products, but we should be able to discuss these values and understand what's going on. So actually, a couple of years ago, together with a bunch of other collaborators, we convened a working group, I would call, of about 21 experts from all, from a bunch of disciplines. Okay, so one thing, when you start talking about human values, okay, you can't just have the conversation among AI people or database people or computer science people. You have to realize you don't know what you're talking about. Okay, so you need to bring in people from a bunch of other disciplines. So we brought people from law and people from psychology and people from policy and HCI and journalism and ethics, okay? And the conversation that we had, that resulted in a 70-page paper that you can find on arXiv, really talked about what are the values that we think are relevant to the discussion. Okay, now we did this in the context of recommendation systems. So recommendation systems are the systems that sort of power everything that we, not everything, a lot of what we see, like your Facebook feed and your Twitter feed and what Amazon suggests to you or any shopping site or Spotify or news sites, stuff like that. So the recommendation systems are actually everywhere. How do we know whether these recommendation systems have any human values built into them? Okay, and obviously, especially on social media, right, there's been a ton of discussion about the fact that actually they're causing polarization, they're causing filter bubbles, they're causing, hateful, they're allowing hate to be propagated. So clearly those are against, our human values. So how do we know what they're doing? So I'm not going to go into that discussion here. There's this beautiful paper that really summarized. It's 70 pages, but it goes really, really fast, especially if you've read it for like 15 times already. But the point of this work was that a lot of the values that we hold dear in this discussion have to do with individual attributes. Okay, so things like being connected to others, being able to express yourself, being able to receive recognition from other people, being able to, your mental health, your physical health. All these things are very individual. Okay. The problem is that we were having this discussion with, people from different companies, and every company can start doing something about these values, but none of these companies see you as a holistic entity, right? So Facebook can do a great job. Suppose we knew even what that meant, right? So Facebook can do a great job of aligning with human values. That's great, but that takes care of 2 or 3 or 5 or 10% of my day. I still have 90% of my time to screw it up, right? I can have a great time on Facebook and then go and completely depress myself on Twitter or on Spotify or what have you. So in order to really discuss these human values, in order to really make progress here, you need to be able to look at the person holistically, which means putting together all the data about a person and giving and taking care of the human values as a whole. Okay, so that was the main motivation that got me working into personal data. So the one thing I don't want to do is get into trouble during this talk. Okay, so a lot of what I'm going to be talking about expresses my own opinion. Okay, not the opinion of the company that is employing me, or otherwise known as Meta. Okay, so I'm trying to keep my job. Okay, basically. So that's one thing. Okay, now so what I'm saying does not. You shouldn't look into this and see that Meta is going to create a product anytime soon based on this. Okay, and actually. we're doing research into what could be done interesting with personal data. Not only that, you'll see that this is what I'm talking about is not something that any single company can do by itself. This is something that as an industry we need to align and decide that this is important. Okay, so that's there. I kept my job. Okay, the second thing I want to note is that a lot of what I'm talking about is influenced by the process of writing a book. I'm writing a book about technology for well-being, and I think that when you start talking about your personal data, that is, if you actually manage your personal data well, then that can lead to many interesting technologies that really contribute to your well-being. The other thing is I don't have answers. Okay, I have more questions than answers. So if I don't know something, it's because I honestly don't know it. And part of the reason that I'm here is I'm also looking for collaborations. I want to I already found one, and I think this is something that as a community we need to figure out together. Okay, so now I'm actually going to start talking about real stuff. So let me give you a vision. Okay, of an ecosystem that I want to see, or that I think would be cool. Okay, so in the center of this vision is this graphic called the personal timeline. Okay, so imagine that if all the data that you're creating, okay, got fused into one database. Okay, so by the way, as Xiaojuan mentioned, I'm a database guy. I can't hide it here. I actually did my PhD in AI, and I've been getting jobs that have AI in the title, not databases, for a while now. So I'm sort of like a schizophrenic when it comes to what I really am. So you're going to see me in this talk going between AI and databases and HCI. I don't actually know anything about HCI, but you're going to see me like not sure where I am, and maybe that'll be maybe that'll be the charm. Okay. So, but what we have here is a database. Okay, it's a database of all the data that you create just by the process of living. Okay, so I'm not, we're not talking about actually doing any additional significant effort in order to create this data, but this data is coming out of like your Google Photos. Every time I take a photo, there's some story there, right? My watch knows stuff about me that is useful. My Oura Ring, this thing that records my heart variability and my sleep and stuff like that, it knows stuff. Okay, when I navigate, to different places on Google Maps, they know stuff. Spotify knows that I listen to Lex Friedman all the time, obsessively. Okay, and you haven't done that. That's one suggestion. Soon you're going to have smart glasses, and that's going to know so much about what you're doing, and it's so much what you're actually paying attention to that there's going to be a lot more data there, okay? And of course, all the books and that I read from multiple sources. So imagine all of that being fused in a magical way into a database that has all of your life, okay? And at Meta, at least, I'm the oldest guy in the team. So when I build my own timeline, my database is the biggest, okay? Because I've got stuff going back for a long time. Okay, so we'll talk about how this gets created. Okay, but this thing has every digital detail of your life. Okay, so this by itself is already valuable. As a database guy, this is great, right? I have a database, I can start asking questions, but the questions can be all kinds of like, when did I go to Tokyo, or what did I eat last night with Xiaofeng and the crowd, right? Stuff like that. So you can actually start asking detailed questions about your life, about experiences, about patterns in your life, stuff like that. But this is like the big database that has everything. But that's not where we want to stop. What we really want to do, this is great, pretty great already, okay? We want to start creating summaries of you, smaller summaries that are portable that I can go and use when I'm interacting with services in the metaverse or wherever. Okay, so imagine if all this summary of my life also created a short summary of what I like to read. Okay, or where I like to travel and what I do when I travel, or my exercise patterns, or my diet patterns, my food preferences, stuff like that. And now when I go to buy a book, all of a sudden I come with my life. Okay, I come with all the books that I read in my life, and now you should be able to give me recommendations right like that. Or I'm trying to plan a trip, and now you can give me suggestions based on my previous experiences, what would be much more tailored to me. So you can create these summaries based on the big database, which is the timeline of your life, but then those smaller summaries can be used everywhere. You can go with them. It's actually like a token. You can put it on your phone and present it to a website when you go and shop. Okay, so these things can go to when you're shopping or planning. They can go to ChatGPT here's a summary of me. Okay. And so when I'm asking you for advice, you know more about me than you've known before. And they can also be used if you're wearing these smart glasses and you're walking down the street. It'll tell you, this is the coffee shop that you want to go to and not Starbucks, okay? Stuff like that. So it's like we have the big database, but we also have these topical summaries that are useful everywhere else we go. That's the ecosystem that I want to motivate here, okay? So let's dive into these things a little bit. So let's talk about importing data. So here too, let's have a moment of thanks to GDPR that forced every company in the world that managed our data to make it available so you can download some sort of file that will mean nothing to you. But you can go to all these companies and ask to download your data and start fussing around with it. Okay, so actually last year I sat down and I actually wrote a bunch of Python code to build my own personal timeline. So I actually built this. Okay, so thanks to GDPR, I can actually download the data and actually put it all into a database. This is friggin' awesome. Okay. Now, the DMA, which is the Data Markets Act, which is the next legislation coming out of Europe, is actually going to make this easier because if you read the DMA, it's 100 pages, so you sort of have to be on a transatlantic flight, okay? There's a line there that says, in Section 6, it says that the companies are going to be forced to give you an API. So now you don't just need to go and download the data. You can actually access it through an API, which means that I can build this much more easily, okay? So that's great. So fundamentally, I can actually download the data, all of my digital data today. Even my local library that gives me most of my books gives me a spreadsheet that I can put and upload into my personal timeline. Okay. Now we're not talking necessarily about importing all of the data. So if I'm importing data from, say, Google Photos, okay, I don't need all the photos. I certainly don't need all the information that Google creates with my photos. It's enough that I import into this timeline enough metadata, enough summary of the photos, because that's going to be the useful stuff when it starts getting fused with other stuff. Okay, so if I can get reasonable captions, who are the people there, where the time and the location and whatever else. That is very valuable information. So we're not saying this thing is going to replace all these apps. It's just going to extract enough data from these apps in order for the fusion to be magical. Okay. We're going to talk about privacy and security in a bit, but right now I built it. It's sitting on my laptop. But we should be able to build secure and private solutions for storing this data. Okay, this is not rocket science. Okay, but I don't know much about rocket science either, so I don't know. So we should be able to build this. Okay, this slide is kind of weird. So this is a screenshot of my data. So you can see, I've got records in my data of books that I read. Now, I didn't read, don't worry, I did not read 22 books in September. There were some duplicates there, but I didn't get an updated screenshot. There's a bunch of purchases. There are a bunch of streaming that I got from Spotify. There are trips. I do a lot of trips. Photos. Well, I take a lot of photos. So all this is just an example that gives you some of the data in my personal time right now. Okay. But imagine. But these are like data sources from the. They're old. Okay. They're for your parents' generation. Imagine the data that is coming from your smart glasses. imagine, the sleep trackers and all the things that you can wear on your clothing. Okay. I was in a discussion a couple of weeks ago about brain-computer interfaces. Okay, so they're going to put all kinds of electrodes in your brain that they actually do amazing stuff. They're enabling already people to operate their muscles by sending signals directly from the brain to muscle groups that activate certain certain parts of your body, which is mind-blowing. But imagine if these things if they shifted half an inch to the part of the brain that actually has more higher level thoughts, and now you can start recording what's going on in your mind. Okay, these things are not that far away, and if you thought privacy was a nightmare before now, it's like this is going to be. But the point is, we're going to have so much more hardware that is we call them toys, that are going to give you so much more information about what you're doing, what you're experiencing, what you're paying attention to, and your reactions to these things. Okay, so this is happening. Okay, so now let's talk about this timeline. So a timeline, as I said, is just a database, and it's a temporal spatial database. Stuff that we in the database community have been talking about for a very, very long time, and a few experts in the room here. Okay, so there's a trade-off here, right? As a database guy, okay, I want to have a schema that will arrange all the data and be able to load it into a real database with knowing all the attributes. As an enlightened database guy, I know that doing that is like not a solution. Right, so you have to find just the right trade-off between some structure, without which you can't do anything, and leave everything else to be flexible. Right. So what we're doing right now is we're again our working hypothesis is everything has just a start time and an end time, because you can get that from all of these data sources. And if you have a location or a start location, end location, you record that. That's structured, so you have time, you have space, and everything else is text or video or image or what have you. Okay. Now sometimes you get more, right? So my Apple Watch tells me exactly how much I ran this morning, what speed, all kinds of other things. So if you have it, fine, import it. Don't throw out good structure. But we're not requiring more structure than that. Okay, is it the avocado? No. So one detail that I found out when you're fusing all this data is that you have the time, right? You have the timestamp, but you have to be careful to model the experienced time, right? So you can map any photo into a global time. Right, but when you actually start analyzing the data, was this lunch for me, or was this dinner, or so you need to figure out that for me it was 12 noon, not whatever time it was in California, just because that's where I live and I record everything. It's a small detail, but it's really important when you actually try to build this thing. So some people ask, why is fusion so important? Why is it so important to put everything into a single database? And the answer is that a lot of the interesting questions you ask come from the fact that you're combining the data. Okay, so a simple example of that is I read books from Kindle, I read it from my library, I get them from Audible, from when I listen to books. So my book experiences come from 3 or 4 different sources. So if I just look at one of them, each one of them by itself, it's like I'm not doing anything. Okay, but when you start doing higher level analyses, right? Like if you're looking at a trip, right? So you can see, you go on a trip, you start taking photos, right? But when you come home, you don't take a photo saying, "Hey, I'm home." No, you don't, right? You see that, the next morning you went for a run outside your house, and so clearly you're at home, or you went to, shop in the grocery store or something. So different sources give you evidence of different aspects of your life. And so it's really important to bring those together in order to get the complete experience of what you're doing. Plus, I'm a data integration guy. Okay, every time I see 2 pieces of data, I try to integrate them. So that's just me. Okay, that was it. Okay, so now we get to a really interesting technical problem. The data that you get from all of these sources is raw data, right? So I go to Tokyo. Sorry, I go to Japan a lot. Okay, so you're going to see a lot of Japan examples. This is just me going to Japan. Okay, so I go to Tokyo. I take 100 photos or 5,000 photos or whatever a week, right? That's raw data. It doesn't actually say that I went to Tokyo and then to Kyoto and I had dinner at this restaurant. It doesn't. It's not at the semantic level. It's just a bunch of photos. Okay? So in order to make sense of that, in order to be able to actually answer interesting questions, I need to take this raw data and turn it into episodes that are meaningful to humans. Okay, or to be able to ask questions, right? Or so you see something like a bunch of receipts and shopping and photos and stuff like that, but figuring out that you were organizing a birthday party for a kid and then celebrating it, that's something that you need to derive from a lot of data put together over a particular span of time. Okay, an extreme example of this is if you're wearing smart glasses. Okay, you can actually not store, if you have the right smart glasses, it is impossible to store all the video that you see during one day. Okay, so that's not even an option. So what you need to do with smart glasses is you need to figure out what out of your day is worth storing or summarizing, right? So you don't even have the option of storing the raw data. You need to figure out what is interesting about it. To store. Okay, so like in my prototype, I had I put in quote, it's a hack. It's not a hack. It's very well thought out. Okay, but it's but I did something for trips. Okay, so I looked at all the data that I have. I looked at every day. Okay, did I sleep at home or did I not sleep at home? If I didn't sleep at home, for a consecutive number of days or even one day, I'm on a trip. And then when I sleep at home, I'm back. Okay, and so now you can see that I went to different places and did different stuff. And there was really important that I had multiple sources of data coming together. So I did this hack for trips because because I travel a lot, and so I wanted to make sense of my data. But the question is like, what other things should we do this for, right? So what are the other events that happen in people's lives that we should try to develop algorithms that will infer them from the raw data? And now there's a question of, okay, we can come up with, I apologize for this word, an ontology, all right, with 100 or 10,000 common events in people's lives and try to infer each one of these, and that's a pretty good first step. But that's always going to leave a little bit of a long tail of stuff that was not captured. So the question here is like, how much semantics do we really need in the system in order to make it useful? And as I said in the beginning, I have more questions than answers, and this is one of them. Okay? By the way, if there are questions during the talk, please ask. So far what we recorded is memories, okay? Stuff that actually happened. It's objective. You took the photo, you were there. You went for a run, unless you cheat. If you know how to cheat the Apple Watch, I do that. These things really happen. But that only captures the factual part of your life. It doesn't capture the full richness of the thing. And I borrowed a term from Douglas Hofstadter. He wrote this book. He's the author of Gödel, Escher, Bach, but he also wrote a book called I'm in a Strange Loop or something like that, which is even pretty fascinating. And he talks about, in addition to memories, he talks about trajectories and subjectories, which are not actually valid English words, but it doesn't matter if you're Douglas Hofstadter, right? You can say whatever you want. And so the point is, so with what I described so far, we have all the objective facts that happened in the past. But I also want to start modeling the future, right? So I know that next summer I want to travel to, I don't know, southern France. Okay, so but I also have to go to Sigmod, right? So it's like I want to make sure that Sigmod and my trip to southern France don't overlap. And so I've got all these sort of partial plans in my mind for the future, and I want those to be modeled in my personal timeline in the same way, as much as possible, as the past. So obviously they're not going to be, I don't have futures, photos from the future, but I have some partial constraints, some partial plans that I want this system to help me with. Okay, so that's one thing. even more interesting than that, and I think is even more important, is our subjective experience. Okay, so our life is essentially the sum of our subjective experiences, right? And if I were a psychologist, I could probably say something very profound about this, but I'm not, so I'm just going to leave it at that. But you know, I had a dinner last night. What did I think about it? What do I remember from the conversation? Did I enjoy it? What do I want to remember? You know, what did I feel from all of these events? Now, the problem with that is the way people capture these things. Some of it is captured, right? If I'm smiling in a photo, or if I had a video that says this is so awesome, or I post it on Instagram. If I post it on Instagram, then it must be great, right? But the point is that most of our subjective experiences are actually not captured in the digital breadcrumbs that we create every day. So. But those are the ones that are actually telling us whether these experiences were positive and whether we want to repeat them in the future, or whether we want to create ones that are similar, or whether we want to connect with people that we had a really good time with and try to create these more of these positive experiences. The problem is journaling is something that is done by the select few, not select, they're few, okay? They're select in the sense that they journal. So journaling is not something that we do as a habit. Okay, and the psychology community has developed a bunch of techniques trying to elicit subjective experiences, and you called it yesterday as and experience sampling. Okay, so you want to sample your experiences and understand what is going on. My opinion is that language models can help with that. So I can actually start telling a language model, and I did this experiment with GPT, ChatGPT a few weeks ago, where I told it, I'm going to tell you a bunch of stuff that I did today, and you're going to ask me questions to help me remember these events, remember what are the aspects of these experiences that I may want to remember, and then together meaning you, you're going to write a journal entry for me for the day. The point is that if I tell ChatGPT that I just had a dinner with a bunch of colleagues in a restaurant in Hong Kong, right, then should be able to ask me questions that are very specific to that experience that will help me remember that experience. And we can have a conversation, and it'll figure out stuff that I really want to remember from that experience. So we're already talking about doing this, right? It's going to be an award-winning paper next year. So just remember. Okay, but the point is that with chat systems, I think we're able to extract much more of our subjective experiences than before, and to me, that could be a game changer. Okay, so we don't have trajectories yet, we don't have subjectories yet, we have everything else that happens. So the question you might ask, okay, actually, I often when I describe this personal timeline, I get people asking, like, why the heck do I need this? Okay, and that's a valid question. So and we've done actually some user research on this at Meta. First of all, don't believe me. There's a book by Gordon Bell. Gordon Bell is a long-time Microsoft, actually, well, Microsoft. He had a huge career before that. He built a system called My Life Bits at Microsoft in the, I want to say, late 90s, because that's when I was across the lake from him. And so he wrote this book called Total Recall around 2007, where he gives you a book-length descriptions of all the things that you can do if you had your personal database. Okay, so just read that book. There's a beautiful story by Ted Chiang, who writes short stories. This one called The Truth of Fact, The Truth of Feeling, where he has this thing called remem that remembers every detail of your life since you were born. Okay, this is fiction. Okay, this is like this is not there yet, and it's actually really interesting because sometimes we have a memory of an experience that was many years ago, but the memory that we create, the narrative that we create in this memory is actually kind of fabricated. It's just like we love to feel that afternoon that we spent, that rainy afternoon that we spent, with our parents, many years ago when I was a teenager, was really pleasant, and now it looks like an ideal thing that happened in my life. Whereas if you actually go to remem and you look at the videos, like, no, my parents were screaming at me, and dinner was horrible, and it's like, why did I enjoy this? But later, I created this I create another layer on this memory that made it seem good. Okay? So sometimes you don't actually want this thing. You don't actually want to remember what happened because your subjective memory of what happened is much more pleasant than what actually happened. Okay? That might happen part of the time, but sometimes you actually want to know what happened. Okay? But what we find is, first of all, you want to ask questions about details of your life, right? Somebody's asking you what to do in Tokyo, and now you can, of course, I don't remember where I went to have this awesome sushi in Tokyo, but my phone remembers where I was, and I should be able to ask my timeline and figure out where it is. Some people, we did this research where this guy had an injury in his shoulder, and most of the time it was okay, but there were things that caused it to feel very painful. And so he wanted to look at his timeline, which was created with some smart glasses, to see what are the triggers, what are the things that he had done that had caused the shoulder to trigger and hurt him. So sometimes it's just like, what did I do? What are the common patterns that I do that are causing me this pain, or they're causing me a stomach ache, or what have you? So it's just like understanding myself better. There's this entire field about personal quantification that also, people are trying to figure out what's going on in their lives. But the point is that if you have this resource, you can do a lot of things. We already talked about once you have this, you can get personalized recommendations much more fast. You can create these short and portable, faceted summaries of yourself that you can take with you anywhere. Everywhere you go. But this, I think I already talked about this before. Okay? Let's talk about privacy. Let's just take a deep breath now. Let's rest. Okay, I'll take a drink of water. Okay? I did say we have more questions and answers. Okay? This is a good slide to remind you this. Look, I think I'm not a privacy expert, but from an engineering point of view, building systems that are secure and that only I can look at them, only the user can look at, is not that hard. Okay, I think we pretty much have them in place. I mean, I've talked to a bunch of security experts, and they don't seem terribly worried about it. The problem is the perception of privacy and the perception of security. Okay, so unlike people in this room, most people don't understand the details of secure databases and stuff like that. Okay, so they're afraid of what this means and what organizations or governments can do with these things. Okay, so we need to find a way to not only give the technical guarantees of privacy, but we also need to guarantee the feeling of privacy and security. So this is something that we need to work with HCI people, I guess. I think one of the keys here is, you want this to be available only to yourself, right? But in general, privacy means checking a bunch of boxes that you don't have time for when you start building the experience. Here, privacy to me means something completely different. Privacy means that you should be able to share a slice of your personal database on the fly, using natural language for a limited time. Okay, so I'm going into a clothing store and I want to buy some clothing, and now I want to, maybe there's a salesperson helping me there, probably not, but let's say there was, I want to be able to say, hey, share with this salesperson for the next 15 minutes any information in my timeline that will show them what I actually wear or what I actually do. And they'll figure out, well, you're kind of an outdoorsy guy, and you do this and this and that, and you got a lot, you're wearing too much blue. It's time to go green, okay? So it's gonna give me a suggestion for, green outdoorsy stuff, okay? But there's no way I could have done this without bringing in all the my past, as you can see, I'm a fashion model walking around here, okay? So, or if I'm going to a restaurant, I want to share, I'm going to a Japanese restaurant, I want to share, look, I've been to so many Japanese restaurants and I remember nothing about what I ate. But look, I took all these photos, can you just you get 2 minutes to look at them and recommend something from your own menu. So privacy needs to be something that I can do right now, tell the system, share my food experiences, share my clothing experiences, and then revoke them once I pay and leave, okay? Again, with chat systems, we should be able to reach them. There are interesting questions of what happens when people share experiences, right? I mean, families that have shared experiences, you're going out on a family trip, you're going out on a couple trip or whatever. Can I, if I break up with somebody, do I get to, I guess we both get to save everything, right? But you know, there are all kinds of interesting questions there. Okay, so bottom line is we can do this. It's a matter of focus and some PR. Okay, so now I'm going to turn into, oh, okay, I'm going to speed up a little bit. So I'm going to turn into a database guy, okay? So the fundamental thing we want to do over a timeline is we want to be able to answer questions, okay? That's going to power, was there a question? So that's going to power everything else we do with these timelines. And I want to distinguish between two classes of questions, those that we will call atomic. Atomic questions are ones that if you find one episode in your database, that can give you the answer. So for example, what was the name of the plumber that I used last month? It's somewhere. All I need is to look at one episode. I can retrieve it and figure it out. And then there are the complex episodes, the complex queries that actually require aggregating information over multiple episodes. So when did I go to Japan? I go to Japan a lot, so you can't just look at a single episode. You know, what did I eat on my second night in Tokyo? Well, you have to figure out first when was my first night in Tokyo, when was my second night in Tokyo, and then look for a dinner event on that day. So it's like what we used to call sideways information passing, right? So these are these questions are harder to do. Now we actually have a benchmark called Timeline QA that is somewhere in the process of being published, and it's created synthetically, but it's complicated enough that current QA systems can't do it, especially these guys. So if you want to start working on some question answering over personal data, there's room for improvement there. So what are the different approaches that you can take to question answering? Okay. Approach number one, I didn't make up this phrase, it's called the language model fanboy. I've heard it from a few NLP people who admit to be language model fanboys, okay? They're all boys. And so what they say is, look, GPT N+1 is going to be able to do it. Just wait, and GPT, or whatever, the language models will be able to do it. Just throw in a bunch of, more parameters, more this, more that, buy the right processors, and they'll do everything, okay? There's approach number two, which is slow down, okay? There's, I would call it the database query processing enthusiast, okay? That describes a bunch of people in this room, okay? Which is, look, language models are great, but they're not going to be able to do everything. The truth of the matter, I think we're going to need or not just the truth, I think the promising aspect of the matter is I think a bunch of both will, is the way to go. But I also want to emphasize that this area of trying to answer questions over this kind of data is not specific to personal timelines. It's applicable to any kind of data that you can start generating or creating that has like episodes, and they don't need to be of a particular person. They can be of organizations. They can be of the world. You can imagine like Wikipedia describing a bunch of episodes that happened throughout history. Imagine querying that. So let's talk about the LLM fanboy for a second here. This is easy, okay? Because you're a fanboy. You're a fanboy. You let to just pray to your fans. So, for example, you might have this is a real question. Where did I take my mom when she was in Seattle? Okay, and you might have all of these episodes in your personal timeline. Mom came on April 16th. We went to the zoo on April 18th. We went clam fishing. What the heck is that? On April 20th, this is real events that happened to a bunch of random people, okay? And then she left, I took my mom to the airport, which doesn't mean she left. Maybe she just loves going to airports, but but common sense says it's probably not the case. The stock market had a bad day. That's irrelevant, but the language model will know how to ignore that. Okay, so if you give all that to the language model, okay, the language model will kind of figure stuff out. Okay, especially, I believe GPT-4 would be able to figure out where you took your mom. So that's great. The problem is that how do you find that blue stuff from all of your timeline, which for some of us is very, very long, right? How do you find only the small part that is relevant, that fits in the context, the window of the language model? I mean, these are getting bigger, but still, your life is more rich than what can be put into as a prompt to a language model at this point. How do you figure out the relevant stuff that goes into the prompt in order to get the answer? And that problem is still open, okay? But here's the point. So what I'm leading to is the fact that yeah, you can do the local reasoning with the language model, but it's that I call it local reasoning because it's local. Okay, so there are going to be things that are going to require set-based reasoning. Now, the database people in this room, when I say set-based reasoning, they're like, of course, this is our bread and butter. When I talk to NLP people about set-based reasoning, they're like, sounds interesting. What the heck is it? It's like they don't breathe it the way we database people do. Okay, so you have to explain. So here's the thing, right? So you can suppose you're asking, you know, how many times did I or when did I go to Japan? Okay, so you can take my many decade long timeline and partition it into stuff. This is actually real data. It's not from my timeline; it's from my memory. And so you can actually, you know, put it into small chunks and say that you see that in 1991 I went to Japan, in 2000, whoa, so 5 times to Japan. But still, after that, you need to put all this data together, take the union and do the aggregate, right? So you can figure out that I went, you know, to Japan 14 times and exactly when. So that's the thing with sets is, right, if you want to work on arbitrary sized data, then you're going to have to break it up into smaller chunks, do reasoning on individual chunks, and then there's another process, okay? And that's where the database magic of union and aggregation works, okay? And that's, so you could say, well, there's an intermediate solution, which is use materialized views. In database, we solve everything with materialized views, right? So you can say, let's pre-compute a bunch of queries, okay? Like, you know, all the books that I read or all my exercise statistics, just compute. What? How many statistics can you compute about my exercise? Just compute them all, right? All my trips, with all due respect to my frequent flyers statistics, right? You can put them all in tables. And now when a query comes in, if I can answer this using one of these materialized views, like how many times did I go to Japan, it's sitting there in a table, and bam. You know, what did my avocado tree look like last year? You're going to have to work a little harder for this. So actually, if you Wang Chutan got this working actually on my personal timeline, and so this is an approach. The question is, you know, how many times are you going to have to go here, and how much trouble are you going to get when you go to the left? So, and actually this leads to actually work that we did like now 3 years ago called neural databases. So the idea of neural databases was exactly sort of this. Let's take data that is in language, let the language model do its magic, produce something that is structured, and let the database take care of the rest. So here, as an example, we have the query, how many people's spouses are doctors? Okay, so if you look at the top thing, Sam and Amanda married last June right after she finished medical school. Okay, so a language model can figure out that Amanda is a doctor and Sam is married to her, and therefore produce a tuple saying Sam is one guy who is married to a doctor. Here, Mark and Art are brothers, both married to doctors. Okay, that's a little more complicated. I think a language model can figure out that both Mike and Art deserve to be in a solution, and there are 2 of them. Natalie, a photographer, was so happy to marry a computer scientist. Now you know this is fake data, okay? So clearly this is not producing somebody married to a doctor. And so now we call this a neural SPJ. SPJ, for those of you who is select, project, join. Okay, it's our bread and butter, but this is neural, okay? So now this neural SPJ will create something structured, and now we can let the database system do what database systems do well, which is union, aggregation, and do this efficiently. So this was the idea under neural databases that that's 2 years old now. But this is basically the idea. The language models can actually do amazing things, okay? And they don't require a schema, so you don't actually have to put stuff into columns and tables anymore. You can just actually say stuff in language, okay? But then if you can train them to create something that is structured, and then the database system or database techniques can take care of the rest, I think that's going to be an amazing path forward. Especially because with language models today, you can actually tell them to create stuff in particular format. You can actually say, I have this question and I want this answer. I want the answer to be in this particular format. So you don't even, you can with zero-shot explanations, you can do this, which actually was not true when we were building neural databases. Okay, this area of research is really blossoming right now. There's so many ways trying to figure out ways to enrich language models with the ability to do more complicated reasoning. So chain of reasoning is where you force it to look at the different steps that it's doing during the reasoning, and when you force it to look at the different steps, it actually behaves better, right? It's like a child learning in school how to do something in math. Instead of writing the answer, 15, like, no, show me the steps, okay? So apparently a language model is much like a child. You tell them to show you the steps, and then they do fewer mistakes. Teaching language models to actually access external sources like Toolformer or LangChain or all these ChatGPT plugins. This is an amazing and very quickly developing area. Teaching LLMs to actually create SQL. Okay, that's another approach here. Is Tao Yu here? There you are. Okay, your work. Okay. And there's actually older work on neural module networks that was developed in the computer vision community that was actually looking at vision primitives and creating essentially a query processing plan over vision primitives. So all this stuff is happening in so many different communities. It's actually pretty exciting. But as you can see, all roads lead to highfalutin data integration. So what is data integration? And I'm almost done. So data integration started, God created the first database, and then she created the second database, and that's when the field of data integration was invented, right? When you need to integrate data from multiple databases. And if you look, I've been in data integration for about 30 years, okay? So what we do in data integration is we build this sort of schema that doesn't actually sit in any of the database, right? So this is where we're talking about books, and we're going to integrate data from 15,000 book databases. So we're going to say books have these properties, and now we're going to create mappings from each one of these 15,000 databases, and we're going to pretend that it's one database, okay? This was beautiful. This is a huge community in databases, or actually not only in databases, but these are slides from the 90s, okay? This is the way it looks like. But now, we have the language model. So we don't need to invent this other structure. We don't need to think about a mediated schema, because we can just ask questions in language, right? And the data sources themselves are going to be in language, and the language model will understand them. So if we do this right, we can create a data integration system that will blow your mind, okay? This is what we're trying to get to. So you take out all the brittle stuff out of the system, right? All the symbols. By the way, this pains me. I grew up doing symbolic AI, okay? So when I say throw all the symbols out of the system, I'm essentially taking my PhD thesis and ripping it up and throwing it in the garbage can, okay? But that's life, okay? You grow with the times. So with the language model, you can now, if the language model can understand these data sources and understand chain of reasoning and stuff like that, then we can just provide access to information in a seamless way that is just going to be amazing. It's going to make Google search look like the Stone Age, okay? And I say that with a lot of pain too. Jane Yu and I wrote a quick paper that we just threw up on arXiv a couple of weeks ago, saying, look, as data integration people, she's not a data, she's too young to be a data integration person, but we're saying we don't know how to solve all these problems. What the data integration literature does do for you, it tells you what problems you're going to encounter when you're trying to create this amazing data integration system. So we know that if you're going to have 15,000 data sources and you have a question, you need to first select which of the data sources are relevant, right? And we know that some data sources will be able to do certain things, certain computations, and other data sources won't be able to, which means you need to compensate for the lack of, you need to do more reasoning in the language model to compensate for what the data source can't do. Okay? We know that when you're doing a combination of data between one data source and another, you actually have to figure out the order, which one has to come before the other. Otherwise, you're going to get bupkis. Okay? Bupkis is a beautiful Jewish word for nonsense. Okay? Anyway, so we just wrote this paper saying, look, here are the problems you're going to have to solve. We're saving you a lot of time by just telling you which problems you're going to find. It's a 5-page paper. It takes 3 minutes to read. Okay, so my conclusions. The idea of personal information management is so old. It goes back to Vannevar Bush, who was a great visionary who wrote this article in The Atlantic in 1945. He called it the MEMICS system. And since then, a lot of systems with some substring of MEMICS have been built. For me, it's my second or third incarnation into personal information management. Gordon Bell built my life bits in the late 90s, and then there's been a whole bunch of activity around this for a long time now in the HCI community. There's been like workshops and panels on this for a while. So the question is this the time, right? Because so far all of these efforts they built on each other, but none of them have really resulted in systems that we're using every day. So is this the time? I'm hoping so. We have much more data. We have our life is just more digital, right? And we're about to create much more data than we even create today. So it's about time that we get this figured out. How do we do this? Is the idea of a personal timeline that fuses all the data, is that the useful concept? Or is there some other way of getting benefit from this data that doesn't involve creating such a powerful repository of yourself? I mean, are we doomed for silos forever? If we do, then we've failed. Okay, one argument that I don't accept anymore is that the corporations don't want this, so it's not going to happen. No, the people want this. The people need this. Legislatures are saying, that something like this could happen. So if we want to look at if we're going to think about technology as helping us as individuals, we need to be part of the abstraction level in the system. Okay, we can't just agree that nobody wants to do this. Okay. Anyway, so not many questions. I raised a lot of questions and gave a few partial answers. And the hardest part in this talk was finding latte art that is better than Xiaofang's son. Okay, but his son makes excellent latte art, and this is competitive with your son, I think, right? So I'll leave you with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the very interesting talk and inspiring the conversations. Now we are taking questions. Any questions? Yes.
First, I thank you so much for accepting my invitation to have a panel. Will be very exciting. So, as database person, we want to look at top line, step by step. So, when you're talking about language model. You put all the wrappers, data sources into language model, and you query language model to do other steps. So is that language model still pre-trained with data sources, or you actually train the language model or fine-tune language model on the fly when you choose certain data sources? What's the sort of procedure?
I think what happens here, so even today we have what's called retrieval augmented models. That what they do is you give them a question, they have a big document store, and the first step is they retrieve relevant documents from that store, and what they retrieve is small enough that they can then give it to the language model to do the reasoning. Okay, so now you can imagine that one of these repositories is your personal timeline, or your personal timeline partitioned into whatever, right, in various ways. So now the question is, how do you teach the language model that certain questions need to be answered using personal data, right? So if I asked you, when did you go to Japan? It's obviously a personal question. When did you go to Europe? Is a combination of world knowledge, right? Which countries are in Europe, and where are the places that you went to. So now you have to train the system to do the join, right? So the framework of retrieval augmented language models, I think, is a good framework, but you got to know which source answer. And then, of course, you need to make sure that if I ask you a question, you don't go to the timeline of my ex-wife, because that's going to be a disaster, right? So there are privacy issues there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Any other? Yes, we have a question at the back. There's one person raising the hand at the back. Yeah.
Thanks you very much for your interesting sharing. So I think database people care more about the efficiency issue, but although the language model actually surprising the whole world, but many of the language models actually has a long latency. So what do you think of the efficiency issue about these language models? And a second question, maybe not related to any technique things. I'm just interested to ask that Meta released the model called Llama, but actually it is a basic language model, which is quite different from the GPT 3.5 or GPT 4, because those models actually are tuned with instruction tuning technique. So I'm quite interested that why not Meta also do some instruction tuning after the language model? Actually, after the release of the Llama, many other groups try to do the instruction tuning based on Llama, and they saw quite amazing performance. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, let me take each one of these. So database people care about efficiency. I've managed to be in the database community for 30 years without actually, I guess I do talk about efficiency, but that's not my, so I totally trust the database community to take anything and make it efficient. Okay, the question is, you got to first figure out what it is you want to optimize. And so, you want to optimize something that is worth optimizing. So I think right now with personal information management, we're at the stage where we need to figure out what it is that we're trying to do. Even if you look, once you translate all of the episodes of One Lifetime into text, you're not talking about a huge amount of data anymore. Okay, it's not trivial, but it's not, compared to what we as database people do, it's not. My life is interesting. Don't get me wrong, but it's not that interesting. Okay, so I'm not worried so much that we won't be able to make these questions answers efficient. There's a detail to that, an important detail, which is what do you do with media, right, with images and stuff like that. So at that point, you need to represent the important aspects of images in text. And there's a technique, there's a paper from Google called Socratic Models that basically says take everything from all kinds of sources and represent everything as text, which actually sounds like a data warehouse, right, in text to database people. So I'm actually not terribly worried about that. Your other question about that's not to say the problem is solved. I'm just not worried. Okay. The other problem, the Llama thing. So the way Llama is different than say ChatGPT is that ChatGPT has the reinforcement learning, right? The human reinforcement learning that makes it, not say things that you don't want to say and sort of gives you better sounding answers. But in doing that, you're already sort of taking the language model and reducing its generality, right? Because you're already saying it's going to be used for this thing, it's going to be used for chat, and that's it. So by releasing Llama, we're saying, hey, you can do anything you want with it, right? And Llama is smaller, and as you were saying, people are doing amazing things with it. Also, the reinforcement learning takes a lot of time and resources to do. But I think what we're going to see, to take your question a little further, I think what we're going to see is we're going to see a whole bunch of so right now these language models that are useful are incredibly big, right? I think what we're going to see is advancements in making them smaller, so you can actually take them and fine-tune them for whatever domain or use case that you want, and democratize the use of language models. So it's important that you have a bunch of sources that give you big ones that then can be distilled to smaller ones, and there's sort of like a flow, a waterfalls type of thing going on. So I think it's a good thing. I'm not speaking for Meta on this. I'm just.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay, question?
Thank you. Yes, thanks for a very refreshing and inspiring talk.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think next to data integration is data sharing, where in the old days people talk about data sharing a lot. So, in your view, what are some suitable models for personal data sharing of personal data? And second question is how to, related to sharing is the value, how to measure the value of personal data. So if you do data exchange, personal data exchange, how to measure, how to price the personal data value? Thank you.
I think that's a really, really interesting question, because now that I have all my data in a timeline, I can actually participate in some sharing efforts. So maybe I don't know, there's a research project on some disease, okay, and I happen to have that disease. So I can imagine sharing, being able to extract from my timeline events or experiences that are relevant to that disease, and sharing that with a research, with a research effort. And maybe I do that because I believe in the good of humanity. On the other hand, maybe some company like Volvo, okay, comes and says, share, all the owners of a Volvo, please share some experiences that you've had with your Volvo, so we will be able to make the next Volvos even better. But now they're going to have to pay me, because I'm like, sure, you pay me some, or you give me a discount on your next Volvo or something, I'll share experiences with my Volvo. So now now that this asset is in my hands, and because it's fused and over a very long time, it's got much more value, then I can be, corporations can come to me and offer me remuneration for my data, right? Or even, I can go and go to an online bookstore and say, here's my vector that describes my interest in reading. Okay, and they will say, okay, if you come with your vector, not only will we give you better recommendations, we'll give you a discount, because my vector has information that is so valuable to the bookseller that they will pay me to share it with them, even for a limited amount of time. So now, the short answer is, now I have much more valuable. The data is much more valuable, and therefore there's an opportunity for me to make some money out of it, if you want, okay? Especially if I'm like a really rare type of person who, I don't know, has experiences that are very hard to find, right? So that's one of the other issues, right? So sometimes you're looking for data, experiential data from customers, and how do you find these people, right? So when you find them, you actually want to pay them to,
Thank you. So we start from here. Yeah.
So two questions or comments, or I'm sure you can respond. One is you've probably seen Mission Impossible. And these movies always start by Tom Cruise getting some kind of message, and should you accept the mission, blah 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 blah. And so in one of them, he gets this pair of glasses. You talked about glasses, and sort of 5 seconds after he gets the message, the glasses self-destruct, so that nobody will know that he was contacted. And this sort of brings me to this. When I compare when I was young, I did a lot
young.
of
What do you mean?
yeah I know. When I was younger, I know when I was younger, I did a lot of stupid things, in my youth, and I still do a lot of stupid things, but now they're different stupid things.
Okay.
But now I can look at young kids today. All the stupid things they do get recorded, and they are available to their employers. And fashions change, and opinions change, and what was smart to do 20 years ago might not be so smart today, and they're sort of stuck with all of this. And I know that with GDPR, we can ask them to delete companies, and perhaps not other people, to delete data. Before we had all this capture, things sort of disintegrated, sort of organically, Your memory got more and more hazy, and you didn't quite, and you suddenly couldn't document it, and blah blah blah. And was it like this or that, or you can't see it, and so that's very different today. So how can we, going to the bookstore with the vector? Well, I would like that vector to say poof after I leave the store, gone. How can we actually develop technology that allows us to forget? That makes sure that when I share something, they don't have it forever. It sort of disappears. They can take a screenshot, and can I control if they take a screenshot and then save the screenshot? So it's a very complicated problem. But how can one do something like that? I think that would be extremely useful. And the second comment is
the first.
Yeah,
so
okay.
I'm glad that this was a comment, because I don't have the answer.
Yes. Okay. But anyway, so what do you agree that this is an important consideration?
I think that's a really good point, right? Because you want to be able to, at least you want to be able to understand that you're sharing this and have a guarantee that you're sharing it for 5 minutes, right? Or that you're going to get a discount on your meal, so maybe you agree for them to save it for a month, right?
Right. Yeah.
I don't know the exact details of how you implement this. I mean, I think you probably need some intermediary that guarantees something, but it seems possible, right?
Okay. So the second one is that I have been doing temporal databases for many years, and when you talk about the experience time, I'm thinking valid time, or in literature people have talked about the told time versus the teller's time. You have a person who looks back or looks forward, But I'm still thinking that in your setting, this timeline is just a view. It's just one way of organizing data. Yep. Perhaps it's useful for many things, but it's just one view. And how the data should actually be organized, at some level of abstraction, it doesn't matter. I don't know how ChatGPT organizes stuff, or how a database person would, or a knowledge graph person would. And in the end, I don't really care. I just need to be able to create useful views, like the vector for the bookstore, or the timeline if I want to get an overview. Right. So it's just a bunch of views on top of something. And then we can do research to figure out what that something should be, but most people wouldn't care. As a comment, or
no, I agree. Yeah. I mean, so when I talk about the timeline, for me it's a conceptual, it's a logical model of the data, right? You can decide to store it any way you want, but the logical model enables you at least to say, okay, these are the kinds of questions I'm going to be able to ask. Now, good luck trying to figure out how ChatGPT organizes the data, right? It's somewhere in the multi-billions of parameters. Yeah. But I think it's also important for the user to understand that the time and the location is something that is organized by, right, in the visualization and so on. Yeah. But I mean, we can optimize it to hell, right? I mean, the hell out of it later. Yeah, totally.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. This is very insightful. And recently, Professor Jeffrey Hinton just resigned from Google, right? And his fear about the AI threat of using a large language model. So if your vision come true, like for example, there is everyone is sharing their personal data such that we can generate a model that know everybody, not just the world model, but also know everybody. And even though if I am not the one who shared the data, but there are 7 billion people in the world, so there's obviously I'm special, but not that special. Just echoing what you said. So there are some similar people.
No, you're very special.
No. So there are similar people with similar experience, and I don't need to share my data. Just someone else that's similar to me, and they share their data, and then some models like, for example, they train up their ability to be a Sherlock Holmes or something like that, and they obviously can read my minds just by this portion of data that I share. So at that time, then the humanity or the essence of a person can be easily meaningless because somebody else's can just replace you. So would similar to the Professor Hinton, then would you feel fear, or what is the risk if your vision come true?
It's too bad Jeff Hinton isn't here, but you're raising a bunch of points. Okay, your experiences are unique. Okay, and the vision is that only you will have access to to your timeline, and you'll share what you want as it provides you some benefit. Okay, now you're raising a point that is because you can map your experiences to maybe some people will share their personal timelines publicly or with some authorities, right? And so just by seeing a little bit of you, you can infer a lot about you because you're similar enough to a particular person or a set of people, so you can infer other stuff about you with high probability just because in some sense our patterns are not that different. So there's a risk. There's clearly a risk in that. There's also a benefit in that, right? Because if you're when you're getting a recommendation, right, then you're getting the benefit from other people who are similar to you who enjoyed a particular recommendation. So maybe that you might enjoy that recommendation as well. I don't know. Fear is not. I don't feel fear about this. I feel that we can do this responsibly and not screw up from the beginning. So, for example, you might say, like, if I start getting weird, ads on social networks that are creepy, I don't care about it. I personally, I'm not speaking as a Meta employee or whatever. I personally, when I get ads, I ignore them anyway. So I don't. That doesn't seem to me a place where AI is harming society. I mean, now when you start talking about political ads, then that's different, right? And there are a bunch of things that have been done by social networks to make sure that political ads stop before elections and stuff like that, right? But I don't know. I see more the positive benefits than the fears here. I also do believe we're very unique, and so the collaborative filtering is good to a certain point, but not beyond that. But I realize this is a very personal, unique opinion of mine. So,
okay. Yeah, we have.
Yeah, thank you for the very inspiring talk. So I really agree with the data, personal data integration, and also building this kind of personalized chat system is very important, and also definitely going to open a lot of opportunities for research and the industry in the future. Just because, for example, when I prompt ChatGPT, say, okay, could you please recommend some restaurant in Hong Kong or something? Probably each time I have to say, okay, I prefer, for example, spicy food or something. But in the future, probably if we have personalized chat system, we don't need to say, oh, I prefer spicy system each time or something.
Right.
I just say that. So my question is in your conclusion slide, you said building this kind of personalized personalized data integration, it doesn't fit big companies interests. Could you please elaborate on that? And because as far as I know, OpenAI will do that in the future. Either, for example, they get your permission to gather your all the personal data and build, for example, fine-tune ChatGPT to build this kind of personalized ChatGPT, or do just as you said, retrieval augmented language models, something like this. So why does that kind of doesn't fit this kind of companies interested to do this kind of stuff?
So what I was trying to say. So first of all, point number one is predicting what OpenAI will do in the future is a bad way to make a living. It's who knows what they're doing, right? But I'm looking forward to everything. What I was trying to say is there's an argument, right, that Google wants to save its own data about you, Facebook wants to save its own data about you, Amazon, right? I mean, Amazon. Why do you keep going back to Amazon? Because it just knows you so well by now. The friction of purchases is very low and stuff like that. Facebook has tuned its feed for you or Instagram feed or whatever, right? So you're getting very personalized experience based on a lot of data, right? So in some sense, all these companies think that the data, right, is their moat, is their unique value, and to some extent that's true because not exactly, right? Because the algorithms that they all use are the same algorithms, right? So it's the data, and it's actually the network effect, right? So Facebook is great because you have 3 billion people there, right? Of your 3 billion of your closest friends. So you hear many times that these companies won't contribute to something like a personal timeline because it will reduce from their competitive advantage. Okay, but I disagree with that. That's my personal opinion, because first of all, they each have a lot to gain from seeing some of the data from other companies. Okay, I think that once you start fusing all the data and creating personal timelines, you're going to create a completely new set of applications, right? Of software innovations that each of these companies is going to benefit from, both Google and Amazon with AWS. So everybody's going to do better when there's more creative ideas going on and more cool stuff being built. Okay. And I think there's going to be pressure from legislatures and from activists saying, look, this is our data. I want my data to be mine and to serve me. So I don't think that argument that corporations aren't going to go for this. They may not be excited about this initially, right? But I think things. I'll give you another example, right? So Google has had the technology for chat search for a long time, okay? But at Google, they just wouldn't release a chat-based search because they knew that the press would be all about what it does wrong, okay? OpenAI did this, and it showed the world that, yeah, you can create chat interfaces, and they'll screw up a lot of the time, but that's fine. We want the good in this. And so now the people at Google is like, oh, you want to chat? We've got a chat. So all of a sudden, they got the license from the outside world to do this. So sometimes it's a matter of who sort of pushes who disrupts the common conception of what is allowed and what isn't. So I think we might be ready for a disruption in personal information.
Thank you.
Oh, yes. We have a question at the front.
So thanks for the talk. So at the beginning of the talk, you talked a little bit about technology and well-being and also alignment. And so a lot of your talk talked about how we can use these databases to find out what we have done or the historical data, but that's not necessarily what we can do or what we should do. And so I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on how this will feed into some alignment and ideas of well-being?
Yeah. Thank you for pointing that out, because I failed to connect it. So I think if you have your personal timeline and you're fusing your information from multiple sources, then you can start talking about well-being in a way that you can't talk before, right? So for example, if I'm spending too much time reading the news, okay? So right now I do it on Twitter, I do it on Facebook, I do it on BBC.com. There's no way for me, there's no system that helps me saying, you've had enough news for one day. Okay, so just the fusion of all of these things will help me, and obviously you need another system over that, right, to help you do that, that judgment. It'll see all the content that I'm being exposed to, and then it can give me recommendations that actually work for my well-being, rather than to my interaction with a particular platform. So Twitter can tell me you've had enough Twitter today, go away. But then if I go to to other places, I'm not doing anything, right? I can go and spend time on TikTok. So that's where, when you have the holistic view of the person, it also might be learning. So for example, learning is a very important aspect of well-being. When you learn, you feel good. You're creating new opportunities for yourself and stuff like that, right? So if I see that. That I'm doing searches on how to, cook certain things, right? In the pandemic, we were all cooking things that we never thought we would cook, right? And so I'm getting excited about certain aspects of cooking. Well, now maybe Netflix can see that, right? It doesn't actually have to see too much about what I'm searching, right? It just sees that I'm interested in cooking and maybe some aspect of what I'm trying to cook, right? And now Netflix can suggest me a bunch of movies, and YouTube can suggest me a bunch of videos. So now all of these things are working on my behalf to show me more content that is helping me learn. Okay, or if I'm planning a trip to Paris next summer, right? So now I can start getting all kinds of things about Paris from different sources because I've shown the interest, and I've shown my interest not just to one system. I've shown my interest to a bigger system that can talk to the other systems. So that's why I think well-being needs to have a holistic view of me, and when you have this personal timeline, you can start talking about these things. Does that answer your question? Because this is a really important. If I'm not articulating this well, I need to go back to the drawing board.
Okay, we have one question at the back.
Thank you for your great talk. I think the idea of data integration really reminds me of another technology called federated learning. And there is a special category of federated learning called vertical federated learning. And it's about, like, I am a user of Facebook. I express my opinions on Facebook. And I'm also a user of TikTok. I follow some influencers on TikTok. But these two companies they do not directly access their data, but they use some secured algorithms to use the data of another company so that TikTok can use my history on Facebook to recommend some videos for me. And I think that's a new paradigm for data integration. Like, you do not physically integrate the data together, but you also use them together for some applications and usage. So I'm wondering what's your opinion about this kind of integration, and what it is different from your data integration, the timeline.
I just learned something new, so thank you. This sounds cool. We should. This sounds like exactly the right mechanism, right? That you have enough information going from one provider to another enables you to get the benefit without, exposing everything to everybody. So you call it vertical federated learning?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have more questions? Okay, yeah.
First of all, thank you for your awesome presentation. Yes, so I see that GPT can do some awesome data task jobs, like counting the number of trips to the Japan, something like that. But I want to ask, how good is GPT when we're talking about suggesting or recommendation for something new? For example, if you have been to Tokyo for like 5 times and you ask where should I go for the next trip, and I think 100% of the models will tell you to Tokyo again. But actually, I think maybe, for example, Kyoto is a better choice because you haven't been to there and it's similar to Tokyo. But if I directly ask where should I go, and some place I haven't been, maybe the GPT will tell you USA or something like that. So how can you? So does GPT perform well in this area, and how can we improve it? If yes, so.
Yeah. So you know, for all of us, experiences with ChatGPT are anecdotal. So I try not to generalize. And actually, one of the main applications that I use ChatGPT for is I go to a new place and I ask it to suggest an itinerary for me. And when I do that, I tell it a little bit about areas of interest or things that are interesting to me. So for example, I'm going to Berlin in a couple of weeks, and I'm going with my son, so I told it I'm going with a 17-year-old, whatever he is. He's a 17-year-old, okay, let's just leave it at that. And you know, we're Jewish, so maybe we're interested in some of you know, history that is related to Jews or something like that. So I give it a little bit of context that enables it to give me a better suggested itinerary. Obviously, if I had my entire timeline, right, then it could do an even better job. So I don't. So the answer is I don't know how. I mean, it does okay on some of the examples that I give it, and my expectations are low, right? So when I ask for an itinerary, it's like I don't know anything, and so I take what it says and I explore it further. But your question, right? So if there's nothing wrong going to Tokyo for the 6th time, but you can tell it like I've been to Tokyo 5 times. Give me something different, okay? And then you could even ask it like, what give me the similarities and differences between Tokyo and Kyoto, and then you will decide whether those differences are interesting to you or whether you actually want to go to Paris instead or Hanoi or whatever. So the point is the conversation through the conversation, you can actually tailor your experience much better. But in some sense, you would like, you know, like the spicy food. You don't want to have to tell it that you like spicy food all the time. Right? There are certain things that it should just know about you, and right now it's kind of hard to do. But these systems are going to develop, right? I mean, it's like in 6 months from now, you're going to have a personal. Some app will have a personal stuff about you that you'll be able to get much farther faster.
Okay, so we will have one last question. Do we?
Thank you for that very nice talk. I just have a simple and kind of naive question. So in discussion of the personal data privacy, your comments have been, I think, very optimistic and about the individual's control of that information and potential commoditization, but still under the control of the individual. What about a more dystopian view? You could easily imagine coercion by the state that demands that you collect this information, for example. I mean, we do that in some circumstances. Police often are required to wear body cams, and you can imagine that as the glasses become more sophisticated, we require that. How do we guard against overreach by the state in situations like that?
That's a great question. Whenever a physicist says that he's got a simple question, you know it's not a very simple question. Okay, so, I mean, I don't have any. We need to think about this very, very carefully and build it into our safeguards into our system. And obviously, the solutions vary from state to state, right? From country to country, and people have different sensitivities and for certain categories, right? So, for example, you know, when vaccines were first developed, right? The Israeli government made a deal with whatchamacallit, to get the vaccines for us, because they gave it, you know, they gave them all the data, all the health data relevant to the vaccine to the manufacturer, right? So there, the government decided, hey, it's in best interest of Israel to actually have the vaccines first, even though some data is going to be shared with the manufacturer, and nobody complained. Or maybe people in Israel, people always complain, but they not enough. So there's no magic bullet for this, right? You should be able to have a button that says poof, and you don't remember everything anymore. But yeah, I try to think about the non-dystopian versions of this. But as you were pointing out earlier, right? I mean, we already have a lot of data that we're collecting that the same problem applies, right? So the same kinds of efforts should continue.
Okay, so let's thank Alon again for the interesting talk and conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for your question.